of the Kennedy School of Government and the Center for Public Leadership, I'm pleased to award Kare Tse the Gleitsman International Activist Award. Karen?
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. How do I do this? So, before I start my speech, I wanted to say that, I guess this is part of it, that it's a particular honor that I'm speaking here today, introduced by Professor Kare Tse, because what she doesn't know is that it was kind of difficult for a number of years. And in the first few years, so they never tell you this at either the Divinity School or the Kennedy School, but it's a lot harder than you think. It's really nice in the case studies and everything happens, and then you actually get out there, and it's really much more challenging. And but I remember in the first few years when absolutely, you know, in the very beginning, I was like, oh, this is a great idea. And then afterwards, everyone's like, ooh, could you get a job? And then people start offering you jobs, really nice jobs with really good packages, because then they really start to feel sorry for you. And they're like, really, if you need a job, I can give you a job. But I was like, no, I have to do this. But at one point, I always remembered that Professor Lutz had said to me, you know what? You're going to do this. And when you do, I want you to come back to my class and talk about it. And so for months, and I would say actually 2 years, every single day, when I have actually a couch in my house, and I call it the crying couch, because I used to lay on that couch and cry at least 15 minutes a day, sort of like catharsis, it's going to be okay. But you know, it's really difficult when you don't know when your next cup of coffee is going to break the bank. But I used to see it every day in my head. I would see myself speaking before Kare Tse's class and saying, you know, it was really, really difficult, but here we are. And I have to tell you, this is even better than talking before Kare Tse's class. So thank you all for being here. I mean, there's so many people who are here that have really been a huge part of the journey. And International Bridges of Justice really did start at Harvard. So it's a really a particular joy for me. And even as I walk through, I get sort of like shivers down my spine, because it's really here that I began to create and believe and see the possibilities. But I also wanted to say that today is a huge honor for me, for International Bridges of Justice, but you don't know what it means to defenders, courageous defenders throughout the world. It's amazing. Since the announcement of this award, I've received literally hundreds of emails and phone calls, and I just wanted to share with you. I wouldn't normally be reading my BlackBerry here. I'm not that much of an addict. But here's one of them. Let's see. This one is from... Here. Ooh. Okay. This one is from Bule, from Swaziland. And he writes with his colleague Zimbabwe, and he's a justice maker. And he says, first, congratulations on the Harvard Award. One big step for Tse, an extra giant leap for criminal defense. Bravo. And here's one from, here is one from our defender in Burundi. And it says, I've just read the message about this award, and I take this opportunity to send my heartfelt joy and congratulations. Step by step, the struggle is being recognized and appreciated by the larger public to the benefit of the fight against bad treatment of the human beings. And part of it is this, is that there are unbelievably courageous defenders throughout the world in every country. And I think that they're often not recognized in any way whatsoever. They're the people who, as you know, oftentimes defenders, human rights defenders we call them, are recognized by the world. And yet at the same time, most of the people who are being tortured today, I would say that 95% of the people being tortured today are not political prisoners, but they're just everyday people in broken down legal systems. And because of that, it's not courageous UN defenders who are helping them, it's just criminal defense lawyers who are often seen as being the exact same, almost on the same side as the defendants themselves. And so in many countries, or in some countries, the defenders themselves are literally the embodiment of what they're fighting for, meaning they stand up in court and they say, my client's been tortured. And the next thing they know, they themselves are ordered handcuffed. They're brought to jail, they're beaten until they're bloody, and then a confession is taken of them saying, I have obstructed justice. And so for many of these defenders, what allows them to keep going is also the strength of their connection to each other and knowing that there is an international community that supports them. And there's a poem that says, it's by Albert Schweitzer, and it says, at times our own light goes out and is rekindled by the spark of another. And I would say that this Gleitsman Award has definitely rekindled the spark for so many defenders throughout the world. And right now, at this very moment, they're really celebrating because they see this as just the first step to the opening of greater triumphs, a greater ability for the world to recognize their struggle and to move forward with it. Right now, I know it sounds impossible, but we absolutely do believe that it is possible to end torture as an investigative tool in this century. There is 113 countries that torture, and encouragingly, 93 of these countries all have laws on the books that say you have a right to a lawyer and you have a right not to be tortured. The question really is in implementation and in resources. And so while I remember 25 years ago being in college, I remember when I was in college 25 years ago, we always thought, this is terrible. All you could do is write a letter, right? There was dictatorships, closed communist systems, authoritarian governments, and you thought, gosh, there's really precious little that you could do. But now, 25 years later, we've got these emerging democracies. We've got in 93 of the countries actually laws on the books that say you have a right to a lawyer, right not to be tortured. The issue, though, is that we haven't come together as a world community to prioritize this, to believe this, and to know that it's possible. And so oftentimes people say to me, this is crazy, that's crackpot, wildly idealistic, nice idea, Karen, but never going to happen. And the reason that sort of makes me happy is because I hear almost the exact same words that I've read before for people when they decided to come together as a group and end slavery in the United States, or come together and end apartheid. There comes a point in history where you believe that it's possible, you see it, and then you make it happen. Now, here's a couple of things. First, I want to say, it was really nice that you said I'm very charming, or people think I'm charming, but the reality is, I don't want to say I'm not that charming, but I'm not that charming. I'll tell you a little secret. A number of years ago in Cambodia, I was working together with a number of training police officers and working with prisoners. And time again, prisoners would come in and there'd be like blood dripping down their head, and it'd be very problematic. And at the time I was working in an orphanage, Missionaries of Charity, which is part of Mother Teresa's group. And I remember that there was a sister there, Sister Rose, and I would say to her, gosh, what should I do here? This is really difficult. How am I supposed to do human rights? I was a lawyer at the time, working for the UN. And I, at that time, was threatened myself, and I thought, well, how do we work with this? And what I remember is that she was really very clear. She came to me and she said, Karen, if you want to really do human rights, there's two things, and two things only. You have to remember that, number one, you have to find the Christ or the Buddha in every person that you work with, because she really believed in the power of transformative love and transformative justice, that you could find that in another person, and that you could, in working with them, begin to transform our reality. The second thing she said is, remember, whatever you focus on will grow. So if you focus on the negative, you're going to grow the negative. If you focus on other things, you can actually begin to create other realities. And so I know that I'm supposed to be very, very charming, but the truth is, I don't think it's that I'm that charming. It's that there are so many people in the world, in every single country, that wants to end torture as an investigative tool. In every country I've been in. And it's been amazing. I mean, I stand with my colleagues, and we've been to so many places, and we're like, we're in this prison. How did we get in here? Or we've been in countries where people are like, it will be impossible for you. And yet, we have always been welcomed with open arms. And people have always said, what can we do to help? And this isn't, I won't mention, but even some of the most, what was considered repressive regimes where we've been, and people have said, you know what? I want to help. I want to help, and I'm going to find a way to work together with you. And that's why I believe that it's possible. And not only do I believe it's possible, I want to, number one, thank all of you who have joined in the community of International Bridges Justice. Thank all of you who have individually supported me as I've been on this journey. I mean, I still remember, first coming to divinity school and being sort of like disoriented about, I'm supposed to be in divinity school, but I really think I should be doing this thing. And then speaking with, our senior advisors who were like, okay, why don't you think about it, but we can do it, and working through some of those issues. And then, coming to the Kennedy School and with Marie Danziger, actually practiced my sermons at the Kennedy School instead. And then having my internship with Reverend Steve Schick, who's also here, and learning to come into different pieces. And I really see that, that they've been individuals who have believed in me in the process. The professors have believed in me, and Professor Deschlener, are you here, who said, you got to come to Kennedy School. And I remember I was telling him earlier, I was almost insulted when he said, come to the Kennedy School. I was like, I'm at the divinity school. I've got God. What else do I need? And he suggested, maybe you need a little more help. And I thought, okay, I'll try that. Came here, and it was absolutely amazing. I mean, I was here so often that I remember students started asking me, do you pay tuition? I was like, not exactly, but I'm here. But what I see is that, I was, and some of the professors might remember this, or you might not have been able to tell, but incredibly shy. And I hated speaking up in class. And every class was like, I would say to myself, okay, say something. And I was this way undergrad, I was this way in law school, I was this way in divinity school. It was really, really hard for me every single time. And so you probably did notice if you were a professor, but I was always the last one to say something because it took me that long to be able to raise my hand. And yet, at the same time, what I began to understand was that it was about something greater than myself, and that we could, if I gave myself up to something greater, that it was okay. It wasn't about me. It was about something else. But I was able to move forward because people believed in me. Like this professor who didn't fail my senior thesis, which was on International Bridges to Justice. And because of that, I was able to move forward and do what you perceive and what I perceive to be something in the world. And this is exactly true. What I ask for you today is to believe with me in the most amazing possibilities with courageous defenders throughout the world. I was just in Zimbabwe, and two things struck me. One is that I went into the prisons, and I've been in a lot of prisons, and I was just in a prison that I thought was the worst prison in Burundi a couple months ago, but I walked into the Zimbabwean prison, and I said to myself, wow, I don't have a camera, but I'm never going to forget this. It was really mind-blowing to me, and part of it is that I had heard that. Even within the last 2 months, 5 of our prisoners have died because the conditions are so bad. So I was really thinking about it in that way. But when I walked in, they were like, oh, they're usually, really cramped in a cell. It's really terrible. But during the day, we let them out. Well, when I saw where they were let out like 200 people in a space much smaller than this, completely crammed, no area. It smelled like urine. And you could see when they would raise their hands that their fingers, some of them looked like they'd been tortured. Their fingers were bent. And I asked them, I said, how long have you been here? How long have you been here? And I know that in numerous countries, which is the issue that we work at, people have been there for very long periods of time without having a trial. And many of them are innocent, but they haven't gone through trial. But I was just curious, how long have you been here without a trial? And 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, 9 years. And I thought, oh, they must be misunderstanding my question. So I said, okay, I'm sorry, let's do this again. How long have you been here without a trial? And they were like, yeah, without a trial, 8 years. For some of the most theft. Or someone said to me, my family's been trying to raise the $100 bail for the last 5 years for theft, but we can't raise it. But you see, it's like really broken down systems. But here is what was amazing to me, is that these prisoners were together in like seemingly the hopelessness, just a very hopeless situation. And yet at the same time, when each of them stood up, they clapped for each other. And it was the most amazing thing. And I said that to them. I said, I said, first of all, I tried to give them something. And I didn't have very much, so I gave them $300, which is not much, but they said it really helps. But the other piece is that I said, I should tell them a story or something, because I believe that hope is a very important thing. If you can't give anyone something, try and give them some hope. But seriously, because of the situation, I think I was so shell-shocked that every story that came into my mind involved food, or I thought of another story and it was about a tiger in a cage. I mean, every story that came was like food, cages, prisons. And so finally I said to them, well, I'm going to give you a gift of giving me a gift. And they said, yeah, that's good. And, the ones who could stood up and sang. And what was amazing is that I saw at that moment, and I was with our International Bridges of Justice lawyers, I saw at that moment that we all really do have a choice, no matter how bad the situation is. And they said to me, we are going to choose to hope. And will you please tell the people on the outside that we still hope and believe, and will they stand up with us? And I went back with the defenders, the lawyers, and the lawyers in Zimbabwe are absolutely amazing. I mean, they are in a situation where one of the first things that Mugabe did was dismantle the legal system. They were intimidated and have gone through a lot. And yet this is what International Bridges of Justice does, is to look at empowering the leadership on the ground. And many of them said this is the first time that we've ever come together as a group. Like one guy said, in 10 years, this is amazing. So they came together, though. And we have a film, so if you want to see it, give me your email and I'll send it to you. It's not a very well done film because it was done by a 12-year-old in Zimbabwe. So it's cut very badly. But the amazing thing about it is that you hear the lawyers coming from a place where it's seemingly hopeless, and they stand up with such phenomenal courage and strength. And they talk about abandoning this culture of fear and moving forward. They talk about being ordinary lawyers, but the fact that they don't need to be extraordinary. They can be ordinary lawyers with an extraordinary vision, and that they can move forward. And they call themselves the history makers. And I believe that. I believe that for every single defender with International Bridges to Justice, that they are actually writing the course of history. And sometimes I think, gosh, I just said that in Zimbabwe. Can I say that in China? Oh, I just said that in China. Can I say that in Rwanda? But I tell them every single time we come together as a group, I say, yes, case by case, you will write the course of history in your country. Because with every case that they stand up and say, don't torture, and let's begin to build the infrastructure for a new system, they begin to change the consciousness and change the pieces. And what we see is that lawyers are coming together, not only within their countries, but also as a world movement. And this, I think, is the thing that's been surprising to us. Many people say, oh, there's no way that a lawyer from Burundi can understand a lawyer from Cambodia. But it's phenomenal. I mean, we started first with this Justice Makers competition, and it's probably embarrassing, but our funder, Martin Halusa, to Justice Makers is here. But this was an idea about, so thank you. And did you hear Professor Letts? You should continue helping. But part of it, and here's the thing, is that, people have said, like, with little bits of money, what can you really do? But the Justice Makers competition was a competition of $5,000 for 8 courageous justice makers anywhere in the world to implement an innovative project of ending torture as an investigative tool. And honestly, we're grateful to Martin because no other funder would fund it. I didn't tell him that, but no other funder would fund it. And all the funders said, this is ridiculous, because how are you going to make sure it's accountable, and this and this and that? I said, well, gosh, for $5,000, if I fly down there, that's going to be one. If I stay in a hotel that I'm accustomed to, that'll be 1,001. But you could really see that, you know, there comes a time in history where you have to build the infrastructure, but trust the people on the ground. And it was absolutely amazing. We had over 2,000 hits on it. It was completely, because he gave us money, but not that much. It was still somewhat voluntary in the sense that we had the money for the basic infrastructure, but it would have cost. We understand that other people have run competitions of this nature, and it's cost over $1 million. So we did it on a fraction of the cost. And 1,000 people were signing up, 2,000 people were signing up. And what we understood was that it was not only the projects themselves that got funded, but it was the spark of hope. It was that we started receiving requests from everywhere in the world. So we started in China. And the interesting thing is that after starting in China, when everyone said it was impossible, we were very successful. We started receiving requests from India, and then Pakistan, and then El Salvador, and then Rwanda, and Burundi, and Zimbabwe, and literally virtually every corner of the world. And everyone said, we have the same issue. We have the laws on the books, but they cannot be implemented, and we do not have any international support to make this happen. Can you help us? And we thought, gosh, you know, we can't just turn them down and say no. We have to at least build some kind of structure because they can hold on to it for hope. And I do believe that if you give some hope, people can go pretty far. Like Professor Letts, maybe that wasn't very much, but she said, well, I'm going to let you come back to my class and talk when you're successful. And that kept me going because I believed that there would be that time. And we wanted to create that kind of hope and inspiration for the defenders, that maybe they wouldn't win the competition this time, but there was something there that could support them. And I tell you that after the Justice Makers were announced, we received so many pieces of correspondence from people who said, I still feel like a winner because I'm now connected to this community, and I know if it's not this time, it's the next time. And Justice Makers have connected everywhere. We have Justice Makers from Pakistan talking to Justice Makers in Uganda, Rwanda to Cambodia. And this has been the amazing thing for us, that they believe together, and they've asked us as a world community to stand up and believe with them. So I want to thank you for believing with us today and tell you that it's not only an award for me, for International Bridges to Justice, but also on behalf of really courageous defenders everywhere. You have given tremendous hope and energy, and I hope that your love and your support and your faith will continue, because I believe that that's what's going to change the world. Thank you.
So we have some mics on the aisle in case anyone would like to ask Karen a couple questions before we adjourn.
Hey, Karen.
Johnny.
How are you? I'm not asking a question, but I want a story. You, more than every other social entrepreneur I've ever worked with, has never forgotten that at the end of the day, this is all about people. And while you talk about hope in the future and what can happen, what you really do every day is you confront evil and darkness. And that's a hard position to be in. And I want you to tell a story about maybe the moment where you were closest to giving up and what got you through in finding that Buddha and that Christ in that person.
Let me think about that. Well, you know, the reason it's hard for me to think about, and this is going to sound terrible as I stand here, a very strong leader, is because I go through that moment quite a bit. So I'm trying to pick one instance or time. But I will say, and this is going to sound cliche because this is the Gleitsman Award, but I was in Rwanda, and it was really strange because oftentimes when we work with lawyers, it's sort of our glimpse into what's happening in society. people often say, oh, Burundi, it's absolutely hopeless. But I will say that in Burundi, the difference that I see is that you talk to police officers and they say to you, oh yes, let's walk down 500 meters near the market and you'll hear people screaming because we're torturing them. Or I've walked into the prisons and this is the political prisoner section. And so you see that, it's very obvious, but because there's an active recognition, you can begin to work with it. And I was in Rwanda and felt the opposite at that time because there was a chilling effect. I did a training with the lawyers, and you say, is there torture here? No torture. You know there's torture when they say there's no torture. And you walk out to, which is what you learn in negotiation class here at the Kennedy School and elsewhere. You go out to your coffee break, everyone says, no torturing unless you consider breaking fingers and burning people torture. And there's an underside to everything. And what you can see, though, is that there's no actual legal aid system there. And the one that's being constructed through the Ministry of Justice doesn't actually have lawyers who are working in the prisons or anywhere, but it gives advice. And so I was at dinner, and I was talking to a woman, Anita, who was co-training with me. And she said, she told me about this case that she had, and she said, oh, you know, she's like, there's such a need. And she was telling me this one case where she saw a woman who was given the death penalty. This is back in 1996. And the woman was given the death penalty for poisoning her neighbor. And she said, I'm going to take this case, because this woman, for some reason, doesn't look like she looks intimidated. She took her case and found out that the woman who was poisoned, who she had poisoned, actually wasn't poisoned because she was still walking around, not sick at all. And in fact, there was no evidence whatsoever that there had been any poison. But of course, the woman had been tortured and had given this confession. So she took this case, and because she took the case, the woman was let out. And then she told me about the second case that she was working on right then of abortion is illegal. So if you have an abortion, you get 5 years in prison. And one of the issues is more premarital sex, right? So as punishment, if your baby dies, which is quite likely, then they'll put you in prison. And so she was telling me about this case where this woman had given birth and the hospital gave her the remains of the child, and she was bringing it home to bury it in her backyard. And the police came, arrested her, and she's in prison. And they said, oh, that's an abortion. And so I was just talking to her and feeling like absolutely overwhelmed, because the reality is that we don't actually have money in Rwanda. We've borrowed money from we've borrowed money to start a Rwanda project. And so like I said, this is cliche, but I was really bummed about it. I was in Rwanda, and I went home that night, and I opened my email in a very bummed state, and guess what? I received an email from Gleitsman. So I would say that in so many ways, and this is like, and then I came back in a very good mood the next day, and I said, oh, guess what? I think I have some money for this program in Rwanda, and we're starting a small women's project. But I think what continuously gives hope is that you do see it. You see pieces of it, and yet at the same time, there's pieces of hope and transformation everywhere. Like our Cambodian fellow right now used to be a police officer in Cambodia who would torture people, and he is now leading the movement for defenders. And I see this over and over again, that people can transform and they can love. And sometimes it's about the structure that they're in, and it's not good versus evil. It's about seeing these qualities in all of us and finding the ways that we can move forward, we can reconcile it and move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny.